Hello and welcome. In the last month I got a lot of cool donations. Unfortunately, I did not have as much time for the hobby in the last 2 years as I would like to have. So, a couple of boxes with exciting retro hardware were stacked in the corner, waiting for better days. Well, sometimes we have to remind ourselves that we are in charge of making a day better. So let's give it a try and see how much better it can get. I unpacked the parts already off camera and would like to start with the expansion cards. First one is a very late and highly integrated ISO sound card from Aztec. This one is based on the Aztec 2320 chip and is a Sound Blaster Pro 2.0 compatible card with a real Yamaha OPL3 licensed and integrated into the sound chip. The sound quality of this card is not the best, but it is still a very nice sound card for DOS gaming. It works completely without drivers, just put it into your system and you're ready to play games. The settings are written into the EEPROM on the sound card and are automatically read on reset. You need to run Aztec software only if you want to reconfigure the settings. Another unique feature of this card is that it has a built-in voltage regulator, which you can set up for 6 or 9 volts using a jumper, and then it will output the selected voltage with up to 1 amp on the rear panel, where you can connect your speakers, MIDI interface or whatever needs the power. It is a quite convenient feature, but you should keep the polarity in mind. Unusual as it is, the ground is in the middle, so pay attention. And because this sound card is so convenient, there were 2 of those in the donation. As I said, this was a very late ISO sound card, and despite that you might think that the 3-angled shape is been made to look cool, well, that has been made most likely to reduce the production costs. As you see, 2 cards fit perfectly to each other along the back edge, and this is how they were produced. 1 PCB, 2 sound cards. Cheap and intriguing. Still, as I said, they are not bad for DOS retro gaming PC if you need authentic Yamaha FM sound and a hassle-free setup. The next card is again a sound card, this time with Evans Logic ALS 120 chip. This card is not quite as good as the previous Aztec, simply because it doesn't have the authentic Yamaha OPL3 FM sound, and because it needs additional drivers. The drivers problem is not a big deal, since the great Unisound universal DOS driver for sound cards works flawlessly with it. However, FM in this card doesn't sound like the original Yamaha OPL3, and this can spoil the experience. Otherwise, this card is also Sound Blaster Pro 2.0 compatible, and the sound quality is comparable to the Aztec sound card. One noticeable feature here is that this card has a wavetable header. The next card is a sound card once again, but I would say this is one of the worst of its kind. It is based on the Crystal CX4235 chip, and it has FM implementation, which is not only far away from the original Yamaha OPL3, but sounds broken in most of the games. I really cannot suggest this card, at least not for retro DOS gaming. This particular one has one capacitor ripped off, hanging only on one leg. It can be snapped off. This is just a decoupling capacitor, and the card should work without it too. Probably the sound quality will suffer a bit. However, if you look more closely, you can see that there is a lot of gunk around all of the capacitors. I don't know if it's just dirt and the card was washed a little bit, or maybe the caps are all leaky and have all to be replaced. Anyway, for this sound card, the effort is questionable. I'll have to test it and see if it shows any signs of life. Then I will decide what to do with it. Okay, I think this was the last sound card. Now we have something else. And look at this beauty, a genuine Hercules graphics adapter, something what you don't find quite as often today. There are plenty of clones around, but original Hercules is something special. Yeah, this has to be a later revision because it looks more integrated. The first revision was made all out of dedicated ICs, and this one has that big Hercules chip in the middle. This card has to have 64 kilobytes of video RAM. Here I can see 16K with 4 chips, each 4 kilobyte. But where's the rest? Right, it's here on the left. 6 ICs, each 8 kilobyte with total of 48 kilobyte. Plus another 16 kilobytes makes 64 kilobyte. Right. As you see, this card is from 1986 and the model is GB112 revision D. Right, Wikipedia says that this has to be a Hercules Graphics Card Plus GB112. It was an enhancement of the first version, adding support for redefinable fonts in MDA-compatible text mode. Released in 1986. If the card works, this would be really a nice exemplar for the collection. What I always find interesting about the original Hercules cards are the ports. By the way, one is TTL, monitor output, the other one is the parallel port for printer. As you see, they are black, and that is special about this card. Usually the ports were covered in metal enclosure, like the game port on this sound card. On the Hercules cards, it always looks like the metal cover has been removed, but it hasn't. They are always black, so if you see a retro PC closed from behind and see black ports like this, most likely this is a Hercules card. Between the ports you can also see a header for so-called light pan, which could be used as a pointer device on the monitor back in the days. An interesting device which had a light sensor in its tip, which was synchronized with the sync signal of the graphics card. So whenever the light beam of the monitor passed the pixel which you've been pointing onto, the light pan registered it and the graphics card knew exactly where on the screen is the position of the pan. This worked, of course, only with CRT monitors and was mostly replaced with the mouse later, but you can find the light pan pin header on most MDA, Hercules and CGA cards. And speaking of CGA cards, here we have one. This is not the original IBM CGA card, but obviously one of the early clones, judging by the amount of the chips and the low integration. Just compare the size to one of the sound cards which I showed previously. The difference is insane. If you don't know just by looking if a graphics card is monochrome or color, just look at the DB9 video output connector. Monochrome signals contains vertical and horizontal sync, color and intensity. 4 signals in total. Color output has also horizontal and vertical sync signals, as well as 3 colors for R, G and B, red, green, blue, and intensity, so total of 6. On this card we see at least 5 traces on the back side, so it already can be monochrome and has to be a CGA. This card has some bent pins. Also there was some kind of physical impact on it. Look how misaligned this chip is. The legs are bent, and this despite that the IC was in the socket. I suppose the impact was massive. Hopefully the chip survived. Where I have the chip out, let's add some contact cleaner. And here's another one. Well, the card looks good otherwise. Let's move on. And here is another CGA card. By the way, this is another way how a color card can be distinguished from MDA or Hercules. At least as far as I know, only CGA and early EGA cards had composite output on board in form of RCA jack, like on this card. I might be wrong, but at least I never saw an MDA or Hercules graphics card with an RCA composite output. However, this one has 2 RCA connectors, and I'm not sure what the second one is for, to be honest. Let's see if we can find some documentation. I couldn't find this exact card, but I found one which is very similar. It says that one output is for color and the other for monochrome. Interesting. Please write into the comments if you know more about it. As you see, these cards are very similar. Here is the display controller 6845, which by the way was also used on MDA and Hercules cards. And here are the character ROMs. This card has 64K of video memory on 2 ICs, as far as I can see. At least I don't see other memory chips. Well, this one has 64 kilobytes spread over 8 ICs. Otherwise, the cards are very similar, probably from the same time. This one has additional parallel port and the other one has those 2 RCA jacks for composite output. Not much else to say. And we have one more graphics card. This time an early VGA card, which is based on the infamous OTI 037C video chip. The good thing is that this card supports not only VGA, but also TTL EGA output. As you see, it has 2 outputs, DB9 for EGA and DSUB VGA output. The bad thing, it is incredibly slow. Well, it is good enough for a slow 286 or even XT. I think this card is able to work in 8-bit slot, but you should avoid it on anything faster than that. First thing which caught my eye is a missing crystal oscillator. Here it is missing a 35.5 MHz one. The pins are still in the PCB, so it's been probably broken out of the card. Oh, and look at this. What happened to this RAM deck IC? It looks like it's been removed from the card and then inserted somehow halfway into the socket. How could that happen? RAM deck is responsible for conversion of the digital RGB signal into the analog VGA compatible one. And with the chip like this one, it would never work, of course. One pin is totally bent inwards. And otherwise, this IC looks like new, to be honest. All the pins look like they never saw a socket before. Very strange. I doubt that this one will work with the missing crystal and the IC, which already has been moved by someone. We will see. Okay, this is a short story. This is a Tanklabs ET3000, also one very slow VGA graphics card, which is capable to output EGA signal. However, this card misses some ICs, as you see, one of which is a PAL. Can you see that 20L8? This is a PAL name. This is a programmable logic IC, which is hard to replace. I would have to find a same card with this IC installed and reverse engineer it to make this one work again. The card also misses the BIOS ROM, but that's not a big deal, unlike the missing PAL. I would say this card goes directly onto my to-do pile until I get another card, which I can use for reverse engineering. And what is this? The PCB looks beautiful with its blue color. All the traces seem to be hand-routed. Do you see how soft they flow? No sharp corners. It looks really nice. The card has 2 RCA jacks. One is marked as out, the other one is in. Seems like the card is been made by Corvus System Incorporated. It's called IBM Mirror. Made in USA. Let's Google for it. So, Corvus System was a computer technology company that offered, at various points in its history, computer hardware, software and complete PC systems. Corvus was a Silicon Valley company which pioneered in the early days of personal computers, producing the first hard disk drives, data backup and networking devices, commonly for the Apple II series. Well, what we have is obviously PC expansion card. The combination of disk storage, backup and networking was very popular in primary and secondary education. A classroom would have a single drive and backup with a full classroom of Apple II computers networked together. Students would log in each time they use the computer and access their work via the Corvus OmniNet network, which also supported email. Okay. Here in 1985, made the decision to enter the PC clone market. Okay. Here, certain models of the drives offered a tape backup option called Mirror to make hard disks backups using a VCR, which was itself a relatively new technology. A standalone version of Mirror was also made available. data was backed up at roughly 1 megabyte per minute, which resulted in 5 or 10 minute backup times. Tapes could hold up to 73 megabytes. That was a mind-blowing amount of storage space back in the days. Look, the cards seem to be from 1983. Also, most of the chips are from 1983 as well. Back then, a 10 megabytes hard drive did probably cost as much as a new car. Here, I could find a commercial of this backup system. Corvus mirror card. The mirror is simply great insurance. For $495, you can buy the mirror and peace of mind. Sounds great. Look, on 180-minute VHS, it could store up to 91 megabytes of data. Though it looks like with 12 kilobytes per second it was quite slow, but we shouldn't forget that we are talking about 1983. Do you remember this? It is a 56K modem from 1998. We used it to surf on the internet back then. Well, surf is maybe a bit too much. Do you remember what 50K means? It means 56 kilobit per second. In other words, 7 kilobytes per second at best. It was more likely about 5 kilobytes per second in a good day. This is what we used in 1998, remember? Now think back to 1983 and those 12 kilobytes per second which were possible with those backups. It was mind-blowing. That's why people were not too shy to put it into the advertisement. This is a very interesting card. But unfortunately, I have neither software nor a video recorder currently at hand. Maybe this could be an interesting video one day. Who knows? And last expansion card for today is this interesting beast. This is an add-on graphics accelerator which was used for professional CAD graphics. It is based on the Texas Instruments graphics architecture, or short TIGA, or TIGA, I don't know. To be honest, I never saw one in person and know very little about it. This card has two ports, DB9 and 15-pin D-sub. I'm currently not sure how this card has to be connected to the monitor, but as far as I know it cannot work standalone and needs a host video card. My knowledge about this technology is highly theoretical. This card is being made by Spear. The first thing which catches the eye is the empty socket here. Well, this misses the Texas Instruments TMS 34020 processor, which does all the heavy lifting. Why is this interesting? Well, because this card reminds me on the modern GPUs which we use today. This card is actually a computer for itself. It has own CPU to which we can upload programs and let it calculate things separately from the main CPU. Just like we use shaders and AI cores with OpenCL, CUDA and other stuff to offload the calculations to the graphics card. This card has 1 megabyte of generic RAM, which can be used for data processing, and additional 2 megabytes of frame buffer video memory for visualization. This card is kind of GPU of the old age. Unfortunately, I currently have no TMS 34020 CPU at hand, and also I have no clue how to use this card. So this is also something what I will have to evaluate. But now, unfortunately, I can't test this card. And speaking of cards, this was the last expansion card in that box. I would like to test those cards, and for that I would need a mainboard. I could take one of my usual tests mainboards, but in this box there were also many mainboards. Let's take a look at some of those and see if we can use one of them. There were quite a lot of mainboards, to be honest, and I would not be able to show everything in one video. However, off camera I sorted the mainboards already and briefly divided those into repairable and hardly repairable parts. Let me show you some boards which I think are hardly repairable. Here is the first example, a PC Chips M729 slot 1 mainboard for Pentium 2 and 3. This was a cheap and very late AT mainboard which was used in many OEM machines under different names. At the first glance, its condition looks good. It has no BIOS ROM, but this is not a big deal. The dump can be found on the RetroWeb project. There is another problem with this board, which unfortunately I see very often on hardware from scrap hunters. Here I have the same board from my stack. Back then, the best Pentium 2 chipset on the market was the Intel 440BX. And all the other chipsets were struggling to reach that performance. However, as cheap as PC Chips company was, they released their boards with an ALI Aladdin Pro 2 chipset and disguised it as BX cell, just to have BX somewhere in the name. Really, PC Chips should have been renamed into PC Chips. Anyway, ALI was actually not that bad, but that's not the point here. As you see, on this board the chipset is covered by a golden cooler which is glued in place. Unfortunately, scrap hunters are very often after all kinds of metal and try to remove it from the hardware, often in a very rude way. As you see, this board has no such cooler, it's been obviously removed. Well, to remove a cooler, scrap hunters often use a simple screwdriver and the lever low. This usually leads to cracks in the PCBs and the chipsets underneath. Like in this case, it looks like a small dent, but the brim around this BGA chip carries a lot of tiny and very fragile traces, which break instantly if you press a screwdriver against those. Well, such BGA chips are quite hard to replace. You need some special equipment, and the effort for such a PC chips mainboard is just too high. Not mentioning that it is a journey to get a replacement chip like this one. So unfortunately, I have to consider such boards as not repairable anymore, despite that the overall condition of that board is good. However, not everything is lost, and such a board can still serve as a great donor for another board. And in that donation box there were unfortunately a couple of such unrepairable examples. Well, of course, unrepairable in quotes, since almost everything is repairable, but the effort has to be reasonable. And here we have another AT slot 1 mainboard from Soyo, which is again a very nice piece of hardware, this time even with the glorious Intel 440BX chipset. As you see, even CPU holders are still intact. However, also in this case, somebody obviously tried to remove the chipset cooler and completely destroyed the chipset. This is very sad, but unfortunately I see such root destruction quite often. Also in this case, the board will probably serve as a donor. There were even more donor boards in that box, like this another PC chips one. This one even still has the BIOS ROM, but this board was most probably thrown and landed on the corner, badly damaging it. On both sides many traces are broken, and also this is a multi-layer PCB, so most certainly the traces inside of the PCB are also damaged. And also this board will end up as a donor. Okay, there were many more boards in that box and I don't want to show all of them in this video, but we still need something where we can test those expansion cards. That's why I decided to give this 486 board a chance. It looks nice and clean, has no obvious physical damages, and could be a good candidate for a test. Well, this is an early VLB 486 mainboard, which is based on the UMC chipset. It is slightly bent, but nothing bad. Luckily, the battery was removed and the area around it looks absolutely clean. No corrosion whatsoever. The cache ICs are all missing, but that should be optional. The board should also work without those. However, it also misses the BIOS ROM and the keyboard controller, which are absolutely necessary. On the back I can see a deep scratch, which could possibly have damaged some traces, so this has to be checked as well. One of my last videos was a step-by-step repair of such a mainboard, so let's try to apply it once again and see where we end up. Identification of this board is an easy task. The name is written on the PCB, PT428, and this is a Pine Technology PT428 board. The BIOS ROM was already archived in the database. Thank you very much for the uploader. We will need it later. And in the documentation we can find the jumper manual as well as a guide how to modify this board to work around a slow cache issue. Yes, there is one interesting mode which can be done on this board, but this is something for a separate video, I guess. Let's first concentrate on the repair. Next step, let's check the board for shorts. Looks good, we have no shorts. Now the scratches on the back, let's check the traces. Yes, that looks good as well. The traces are okay. Despite that the scratch looks quite impressive, as you see it crosses two traces, but they both still have continuity. Very nice. Next step, checking the CPU voltage and the clock. The clock looks good, it is at 25 MHz. Obviously a 25 MHz CPU was previously installed in this board. The voltage also looks good, it is at 5 volts. Okay, everything looks good so far. Time to populate the ICs. I'm going to use a 33 MHz 486 SX, so I will have to switch the jumpers from 25 to 33 MHz. That's just optional, the CPU would also run at 25, but since it's 33 MHz, let's do it. The BIOS ROM image I already downloaded from the Retro Web project and wrote it onto an EEPROM. As for the keyboard controller, I have a collection of chips from all kinds of donor boards. Such a keyboard controller is actually a generic Intel 8042 microcontroller, which is usually programmed by the manufacturer to fit the BIOS ROM and the board. But majority of manufacturers just used default firmware for their keyboard controllers, and so they are mostly interchangeable on many boards. This, however, doesn't work in 100% of cases, but in the most cases it does. As I said, the CPU will be an Intel 486 SX33. Let's add a post analyzer card and APC speaker. Yay! The good news is that some numbers are running on the post analyzer card. The bad news, I don't hear any beep codes. I was expecting to hear some beeps complaining about missing RAM. This is unusual. Well, let's add some RAM and see if something changes. Here I have 4 times 1 MB memory modules. This is a 32-bit system. Each module is 8-bit, so we need 4 modules to come to 32-bit bandwidth. I turned the camera to get a better view angle, but unfortunately forgot to push the record button. But I'm glad to tell that the board woke up and started to complain about missing graphics card. So let's add a graphics card and see if it starts to post. And yay, we can hear the memory counting clicks. The board is alive. So I connected the monitor and the keyboard. And yes, the keyboard works, at least I can navigate in the BIOS. That's a good sign. Let me add an IDE controller with a compact flash card and try to boot into DOS. This IDE controller should actually work. I use it all the time. Okay, I put some dioxide into the ISO slot and reinserted the IDE controller, and now it's working. Probably the contacts were a bit dirty. Microsoft DOS is booting properly. I will not do any excessive tests now. The board seems to be alive again. That, I hope, is good enough to test the expansion cards. Landmark tells us that this is a 486DX, despite that this is actually an SX CPU. However, FPU shows as NA, so everything's fine. First of all, let's give the OTI VGA graphics card a go. This one will probably not work without the missing crystal, but let's see. Wow, and it does. Exciting. The system forgot the BIOS settings since I didn't connect any battery, so I have to set it up once again. Probably that missing crystal on the graphics card is used just for some video modes, but is not necessary for everyone. Nice. Still, I will have to add the crystal to make it complete. But at least, to some extent, this card is working. Next one is the glorious Hercules card. I have no TTL compatible monitor, only VGA, but I will use my MCE to VGA adapter to convert the signal to VGA. Let's see what we get. Wow, the card seems to be working as well. This is black and white mode, but I can switch the amber color emulation on my MCE to VGA adapter. Look how cool is that! Prince of Persia is one of the games which supports Hercules graphics mode. Well, it's a short test, but I consider this card as working so far. A great piece of history. The next one is this CGA card. By the way, I found that this is a Dell CG100 MDA Hercules and CGA compatible card. Let's see. Oh, and now I'm especially glad that I took this 486 board to test the card. You see, the 16-bit slots do not allow to put such type of cards into it. You see, the card has a cutout for an 8-bit slot and expects nothing behind it. Luckily, this board has a dedicated 8-bit slot as well. As you see, the space behind it is completely free, so such long, old 8-bit cards would fit into it. This is, by the way, why many AT boards continued to provide some 8-bit slots, so older expensive XT hardware could be used in those machines. And we have an output. Display type mismatch, of course. We changed the type of the card. Do you notice how big the letters are? That's the default 40 by 25 text mode on CGA cards. But in BIOS, we can switch to 80 by 25 instead. And it looks much better. Still, the characters look very clunky. My retro heart likes this look, but compared to Hercules, this looks very low res. This is why on business machines, users preferred to have monochrome Hercules graphics card. There were no colors, but therefore it was much more convenient to work with text. For gaming, of course, CGA was more interesting. Once again, Prince of Persia also supports CGA. Well, CGA was indeed more interesting for games, but compared to Amiga or Atari back in the days, CGA with its 4 colors palettes was not really a good looking thing. At least through the TTL output at full resolution. At lower resolution or through a composite output you could get up to 16 colors, but that's another story. For now, what is interesting for us, this card is absolutely working. I repeated the same procedure with the second CGA card and it was completely working too. And this video is already quite long and I'll do a small shortcut here. After I checked the graphics card, I went through all of the sound cards as well and they were also all working. Well, almost. These crystal cards did work, but it produced terrible sound, clicking and scratching all the time. As I said, most probably the capacitors are all bad and have to be replaced. I don't know if it's worth the effort. I really don't like the sound chip. It exists on other cards with external FM synthesizers, then it's another story, but as standalone, nah. So all this stuff is working, which you can see on the screen. Some expansion cards need additional fixes like missing crystals or slot brackets, but essentially they are working. This mainboard is working as well, and it didn't need a lot of work to bring it back to life. However, this board is maybe interesting for the future videos. There is more about it to tell. Things like BIOS tweaking and write-back cache mod, which was mentioned on the RetroWeb project. Maybe you will see this board in one of my videos again. We will see. And for today, this is it. I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough and small mainboard repair. I'm planning to make a couple of repair videos in the near future too. So if you are interested to see more, don't forget to subscribe. And so far, thank you for watching and goodbye.